San Jose State women's volleyball had their season come to an end when they lost to Colorado State in the Mountain West Conference title match. Their season ended, and so did the career of one young player. Until this summer, the Spartans' transgender player's career had gone on without scandal. But for the last few months, she has been outed, targeted, and harassed. San Jose State made it to the conference final not because the Spartans are a women's volleyball powerhouse, but because opponents did not allow their women athletes to play. San Jose State was 6-6 in conference games it actually played this season. They won 6 games by forfeit to Boise State, Wyoming, Utah State, and Nevada. Boise State refused to play San Jose State a third time in the conference quarterfinal. Up next on Beyond Today's Headlines, how San Jose State women's volleyball became the center of transgender athlete debate.
My name is Dr. Jen Fry. I run Jen Fry Talks. We sit at the intersection of conflict and culture. And the way we look at it is if we can help people better mediate and understand conflict, especially how they grew up in conflict, how they learned to navigate it, how it was role modeled, then we can help them become better humans. To me, conflict is a mental health imperative. And so I really want to help people get better at it. And whenever we talk about conflict, we also talk about different compartments of DEI. And within that is also trans folks and trans rights.
How does the debate between what's going on over at San Jose State, how does that fit into the national conversation on transgender athletes in sports?
I mean, it was, I think, the conversation on trans rights has been going on pretty hard. I mean, forever, but especially within the last few years. And I think this part of it, especially being so close to the election, was really like a piece of kindling in a fire almost, because this athlete that we're talking about has been playing college sports for 5 years. She played club volleyball for 3 years. She played high school volleyball for 3 years. So this is not, and she had transitioned, I believe, when she was 15 or 16. So she's always been a woman, and she's always been a woman playing female sports within college. So this conversation is right in the middle of trans rights, trans sports, because it talks about how people use language, and I'll say this word very strongly, they use language in a very violent way against trans folks, especially trans women, to make it seem like they're bigger, scary, stronger monsters, to dehumanize them. The whole goal of the language right now is to really dehumanize them, so then we can say whatever we want about them. We can do whatever we want against them because they're monsters. So I think this situation is just a piece of wood in this firestorm against trans folks and trans rights.
And all due respect to San Jose State, just as a general volleyball team, but their team isn't very good, and so I think that the lot in the broader sense, I guess I'm not, like I said, I'm not trying to say, but in the broader scheme of things, in the Mountain West Conference, this is a team that might have not made the conference tournament had these forfeits come into play. And so I guess I'm just kind of wondering what you think about the argument that she's stronger, better, because of the trans issue. What what is your take on that role or that discourse?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that San Jose State's a bad team. I would just say they're an average team in a middle D1 program or D1 conference, right? They're just a very average team. And 100% agree with you. Had they not got those 5 forfeits, they might not have made it to the tournament. And Brad, work with me with this really weird analogy. I love weird analogies. So do you remember the book 50 Shades of Grey?
Yes.
And do you
absolutely.
remember how there's huge, I see you probably have all the episodes or all the volumes, Brad. Okay, we see you.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But 50 Shades of Grey was not a well-written book at all. People will say across the board, it was not a well-written book, period, or within that genre. But do you know what made it become a firestorm? Florida libraries banned it. That is what made it. It wasn't that everyone was like, oh my God, this book is something we all need to read. No, when you ban something, Guess what happens? Everyone makes it seem like it's now the thing to read. They wouldn't have even made a movie over it if literally they hadn't banned it. And if you go back and look, people banning it are the reason why it got to be this big thing, right? And I think with this episode, this young lady had been playing there for this was her third year. There was nothing, they had been average the whole time. One of the schools, I think Boise State that she played against, she had been like .097 historically playing. So she was just a normal athlete who, as she played 5 years in college, she hopefully would have gotten better. But the problem with language, again, is that they made her seem like this monster who is big and strong. And that's just violent, because that's not true. Everything she did was on par with her talent at that level. Her former assistant coach was like, I've never seen someone hit that hard. Girls, shut up. And I say that strongly because we just got done watching the national championship volleyball match, and those girls were thundering balls down. So to say that this young lady was hitting harder than she's ever seen is a violent lie. It's again to dehumanize and make this person seem bigger, stronger than she is. And she wasn't. She was a good, decent player at that level. And so I think that's the problem when we're looking at the language, is she's not jumping higher, hitting harder, moving faster. She's not doing anything that this language would equate to. And I think that's the biggest problem. And that's why, Brad, I'm so specific on language, because language can change the story of anything, right? It's like if we are talking and I'm just being passionate, and then after this, you're like, wow, she was really angry and aggressive. Language changes stuff. And when we talk about humans, especially trans folk, especially trans women, in this violent way, we're changing the narrative to make them seem like these big, fast, stronger monsters. And that's inherently not true. Charlie Baker was in front of Congress. There are 10 trans athletes playing right now in the NCAA. We don't know Division 1, 2, or 3, but 10. If they were bigger, faster, stronger, we would know who they were, and they would be leaps and bounds above people. But that's inherently not true. Again, I can't say it enough. She went through 4 of 5 years of no one having a clue who she was. She didn't win All-American, Player of the Year. She wasn't anything like that would make people be like, who is this? She was an average player on an average team, a lovely girl, but the language is trying to make it seem like they are trying to use language as a reason to be mean. And that, to me, is the problem.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the NCAA went in front of Congress, and it seems that they're trying to get, and I could be wrong, so please correct me if I am wrong, but it seems like they are taking a very submissive role in how they're trying to like navigate this tension. You know, the NCAA doesn't seem like they are trying to get out in front of it. It seems like they want the government to enforce or make laws for them and do it for them. Do you agree with that, or do you see that the same way I do? Or I guess what's your take on how the NCAA should navigate this tension?
I feel like the babies are in front of lawyers for everything right now. They're probably trying to pick and choose their battles. I mean, think about it. They're in front of the lawyers and the Congress for the House settlement, for revenue sharing, for NIL, for trans, like everything. They're in front of Congress every single day in front of lawyers. It might be at this point they're like, we only have 10 athletes. Like, what are y'all doing? We got shit to do, right? Y'all are wasting our time. We have 10 athletes out of, what do you say, like 460,000. So maybe for them, it's like you all are making it such a big issue that it doesn't need to be, and it doesn't need to be taking up so much of our time, is probably what he's trying to say, because there are so many other fires going on. 10 athletes, is it really worth the fire that other people are making? And the truth is absolutely not. You know what should be? It's what's in these people's DMs. The way women athletes are treated is horrible. The DMs after they lose, especially when we talk about the intersection of race and gender, is brutal. That's the stuff that people should be going in front of Congress, not for 10 trans athletes. We don't even know if they're female to male, male to female. We don't know anything. We just know that there's 10 trans folks. That's all we know. No one knows anything else.
You talked a little bit about the mental health of women athletes just in general after they lose and what happens to them. But what's the impact like of the mental health of this young woman that plays at San Jose State or these other 9 trans athletes that are in sport who that face that harassment?
I mean, we don't know those 9, and I hope that we don't find out because their life becomes hell. The way the San Jose State athlete handled this situation with her assistant coach treating her like trash and doing that. Her setter, who also, mind you, kept setting her every single game, was saying like, oh, I'm so glad that people are protesting. We're suing her. For her to not say anything, for her to keep playing, for her to high five that girl, for her to be in huddles is astounding. And that woman needs like a Nobel Peace Prize. Like for her to do that with that much hate coming at her, because here's the thing. In sports are supposed to be like your safe haven, right? It's supposed to be the place where you're getting away from kind of the real world stuff because you have your team and your coaches there surround you with love. Your team is supposed to be that literally that family because you spend so much time with each other. You get to know each other in the bad, the good, the ugly, the hard. You go through such hard things together. Like that should be your solace, right? And for her to have to deal with that, she had to move dorms. She had to keep really everything in tech because had she did anything, said anything, it would be this, look at this aggressive person and like the words used. But like for her to maintain her professionalism and how she handled everything is breathtaking. I hope she writes a book and makes millions of dollars. I will buy millions of copies. Like, I hope she does that. Her mental health, I hope she has a good therapist because I can't imagine the trauma, the feeling like despondent, feeling like these people that, I mean, she played with this girl for 2 years, right? Like they were sweet mates. This person that knows everything about you to turn on you, not only turn on you, but turn on you so publicly and violently. I know she has a good support system because I have friends who've checked on her. But man, that trauma is going to last forever. And I hope she writes a book and makes millions of dollars.
How has media coverage of this story shaped public opinion?
I think you have to add in media and politics. Because if we remember, Leah Thomas won a national championship 2-3 years ago, and this didn't happen. People weren't forfeiting. Also, can I add, Brad, that some people, especially Wyoming, were saying that like the Mountain West slid this policy in about trans athletes, and all the language is very hostile around it. In 2022, all the presidents of the Mountain West signed this trans policy, understanding that if they forfeited, they would actually get it as a loss. So they were very aware 2 years ago about this. And so I think it's right now the intersection of politics and media that cause it to be this firestorm. Because this is not a safety issue. And that's what people are trying to say. And then what you're trying to say is that trans people are dangerous. How? If we look at data, trans people aren't attacking people in bathrooms. You know who are? Cis men. Cis men are the ones who are dressing up in wigs and attacking women. Cis men are the ones that are unsafe when women are walking down the street. It's not trans women. So the language against language around trans people is what makes it very, it makes it even, I don't want to say more serious, but I like to say more violent. It's like, I don't want my daughters around trans people. Hun, you'd probably rather have your daughter around trans people than that uncle that everyone knows about, right? That grandpa that asked all his granddaughters to sit on his lap for a little too long. So like y'all are sitting there talking about safety. The language being used is to make them, again, dehumanize them, make them seem like monsters, make them feel like you can't be safe around them. They're going to try and steal your kids, take your kids. Trans folk ain't got time. They got families and lives. They're not trying to take people's kids. But if we look at the data on who's doing sexual assault, male coaches, male teachers, male pastors, male rabbis, male preachers, male bosses, male athletic directors, male sheriffs, the data is showing a very different story.
Yeah, I think I've definitely seen enough Law and Order SVU episodes for to know. I mean, how many episodes? There's 0 It's always something. It's always someone, non-trans that's doing it. So
Yes. That's
you
like
know,
that's the interesting thing. Like, so I live in Baltimore. They're literally, I think, like closing like the Catholic diocese. They had, it was like a 468-page document of sexual assaults within the Catholic Church. Hundreds of people were coming forward. They I think they closed the churches because of the lawsuits. The amount of lawsuits within the Catholic Church, and y'all are talking about trans folk. You would rather leave your kids with Catholic priests with what's going on than a trans person? Man, you're out your mind. The numbers don't lie. But again, the language that they're using wants to pivot to trans folk versus what the real problem is and where it really is unsafe.
so going back to the NCAA and the Mountain West Conference as a whole, what do you think? What kind of strategies do you think that either institution could adopt to maybe foster a more inclusive environment for trans athletes?
You know what? I will tell you this. San Jose State and the Mountain West did the best that they could with what they had. They did Gloria with the Mountain West. They did the best that they could with this situation. They were literally building the plane, reading the directions with a screwdriver in their hand, because this all became a firestorm in like September. She played with the team for 2 years. Nothing was going on. But you know what was going on was the election. And so in September, that's when I think Blair was outed. And then that's when the firestorm happened. So you're talking about, it's almost like you're walking down the street and everything's fine. And then a piece of roofing falls out of nowhere. And everyone's just like blindsided. And there's just more roofing. And you're just like, what's going on? And so they did the best that they could. I think that I hope they look back on this and were able to say, this is where we were awesome. This is where we could have worked it, and were able to implement some more policies. But they did really the best they could. They already had this policy in place from 2022 that if you forfeit because of a trans athlete, it's a loss. So they already had that. I think maybe when it comes to the tournament, they could maybe have some different ones, but there wasn't the big firestorm at the tournament when the athlete was playing. So I think that they did the best that they could in this situation. I don't know, because it's a public school, right? So public school is very different than private school. And you have to keep that in mind. And because I know a lot of people are like, we wanted that setter kicked off. I'm like, you can't. You have been sued, and the school would have been changed. The name wouldn't be San Jose State anymore. It'd be someone else's name. So I think that when you think about the constraints of public school, right, media, everything, they did the best that they could with what they had. And I think that, I don't know if there's any other policy things that they could have done, because there were a lot of stuff behind the scenes that they did to help support Blair.
That's crazy that they had this rule in place that specifically says if you forfeit because of a trans athlete, then it's automatically a loss. I would assume that it's a loss anyway because it's a forfeit, but the fact that they went ahead and they got out in front of it, you'd think that that's a very good point.
All the presidents signed it. It wasn't that like the Mountain West, because the Mountain West, right, their response to the presidents. So this wasn't like they just did it themselves. And like this one article I read, it was like they snuck it. You can't sneak a policy in like this. Like, what are y'all talking about? You can't just be like they almost treated it like one of like the old cartoon villains who are like, ha ha, put the policy in, they will never know about it. Bro, what are you talking about? You can't do that. You got presidents and athletic directors that have to sign off on really critical stuff that deals with forfeits and losses. Like, people were like, rubbing their fake mustaches and their goatee. No.
And what do you think the future holds for transgender athletes in collegiate athletics?
That's hard because it depends on administrations. And I think that this administration is going to try to make their life hell. I think they're going to make it seem like they're these violent monsters. I wonder if they're going to try and, I don't know if they can do a blanket nationwide policy against trans folks. Like, I don't know, because, I mean, the thing about it is that sex is a spectrum, right? You also have intersex. So are we talking about DNA? Are we talking about like the outward genitalia? What are we talking about? There's XXX, X or XXX, XXY. There's like, gender disorder. Like there's so many different things. So like, what are we talking about? Because I will tell you this, Brad, if it's this thing about DNA, I think people would be shocked that all these big important athletes, I think people are going to be shocked that their DNA isn't all XX or XY. I think we're going to see that there is some fluctuation within it that will shock people. So I think it's going to be that this upcoming legislation, they're going to probably try and do like a blanket policy. So I think that's the thing. And then the question is, what does it go against the IOC with the Olympics? Because I think we had one trans athlete do weightlifting in the Olympics and they ended up not qualifying for the next round. So I think it's going to be like, what does that mean in relation to IOC, NCAA, National Federation of High School, like all those different associations? What does that mean? I know Florida was doing the horrible shit of like checking genitalia. Are we going to start doing like DNA tests? Like what is this going to look like? Because at the end of the day, the people it's going to affect the most are going to be Black and brown women, right? Because now we think about historically how Black and brown women have been socialized to be monsters or men because of our build, because of our look. So that's what's going to start happening, is that it's not trans women that's going to be, I think, hurt the most. Is going to be cis women, because now that thing could be weaponized against really good cis women who maybe are a little too muscular for someone's liking. I think the thing is that people are trying to make it seem like you can tell who is trans, right? Like you could tell. Folks who transitioned, if you really want to play that game, women's bathrooms are going to be really uncomfortable if you're making trans men be in women bathrooms, trans men with big beards. Like if you want to play that game, like there was one trans woman who was washing her hands in the men's bathroom, was like, they're making me be here. And the guy was literally like, get out. What are you doing here? They don't realize that if you play that game, it's not going to work the way you want to. F around and find out. Right. But like also to go back, you're enacting a bill for one person. That's I think the mind-boggling part about that. Florida was like, they were having doctors do genitalia, like looking at like kids. And just think, if we're talking about sexual assault, if we're talking about that, now you want to put your kids in front of male probably doctors to check their genitalia, to do hand exams on 10, 11, 12, like y'all would rather have that. Like that, I think, is another thing, because it's not going to be on boys. It's only going to be on girls. Like, let's be very frank. And so the fact that these parents are okay with their kids being touched inappropriately because they're afraid of one trans 13-year-old, I think it goes back to women's bodies and how we don't have ownership over them. It goes back to abortion rights, that the only abortion that's acceptable is if a woman's been raped by a man. So unless we've been, our body's been desecrated by a man, we can't have control. And so all of that circles around women and our bodies and control of our bodies.
That was Dr. Jen Fry. As always, you can read more about this story in our show notes. My name is Brad LaPlante. Happy New Year, and I will see you all again next week.